Hello, welcome back to Discover the Wonders. So today we're up to the exciting part of Joseph's story when his brothers come back to Egypt to get food and they meet Joseph, who they are not expecting. So they tried to get rid of Joseph and now they're having to face him again years later. And I'm going to tell you two other really neat stories of two men who tried to get rid of Bibles and how years later the Bibles came back to them again. And they're really amazing stories. One of them in particular, it seems too amazing to be true, but it is true. It is history. So I hope you enjoy these stories. So let's start with the story of Joseph. So last week we had the story of Joseph getting out of prison. His life was suddenly changed when the king had a dream. And he went from being a prisoner to being the governor of all Egypt. So that is an amazing story. And we talked about the wonder of the 4 seasons and how Joseph's life was a little bit like the 4 seasons. So he worked very hard for the king. For 7 years, they stored up all the extra food to prepare for the 7 years of famine. So the dream did come true, just like Joseph had predicted. There were 7 good years and then came the 7 bad years. But they were ready for the bad years because Joseph had been storing up all the extra grain. It was kind of God to give the king that dream so that he would know about the years of famine so that they could be prepared. Now, one day when they're into the years of famine, Joseph has some people come to him. So he's the one in charge of selling all of the corn and the grain. Now, one day there are 10 men standing there wanting to buy corn. Now, they're not from Egypt. They've come from another place, from the land of Canaan. Now, Joseph looks at these men and he recognizes them. They are his 10 brothers. Well, 10 of his brothers. Benjamin is not there. Benjamin was his full brother. So his brothers have come to buy food in Egypt. They have absolutely no idea that this governor is their brother Joseph, whom they sold as a slave. They thought by now he'd probably be dead, with the life of a slave. And when Joseph had got sold, he was 17, and now he's like in his 30s. So a lot of time has passed, and here they are coming back to Egypt. They probably didn't even want to come to Egypt because they're kind of having to face, what they did with Joseph because they sent Joseph to Egypt. And so he looks at his brothers, and he decides to kind of try them out a little bit. He wonders if they're still like they were back when he was 17. So he kind of plays some tricks on them and he's a little bit harsh to them, but the purpose is to see if they have changed. So he says to them, "You guys are just spies." And they say, No, we're not spies. We've come to Egypt to buy food. We're a family. There was 12 brothers, but one of them died, and the youngest one is back with our father because our father didn't want him to leave. And so Joseph is listening to this. He hears that his father's still alive and Benjamin, and he hears that they think that he's dead. That'd be kind of a little bit strange to hear somebody talking about you, how you died. But he says to them, "Nah, I don't believe it. I think you're spies. You just come here to spy out the land and see what's going on in Egypt." And they said, "No, we're really not spies. We've just come here to buy food." And he says, "Well, if you are really not spies, to prove it, next time you come here, you need to bring your youngest brother. And in the meantime, one of you is going to stay here as a slave. You're going to stay here in prison, one of you." Now, these brothers, when this happened, they've just come here to buy food and now they're in trouble. They've been accused of being slaves. One of them is going to stay in prison and they need to bring Benjamin back. Is Dad going to let them bring Benjamin all the way to Egypt? So they start to talk to each other. Now, Joseph speaks in the Egyptian language. So when he talked to them in Egyptian through a translator. So the brothers start talking to each other and they say, "Oh, remember what we did to Joseph years ago? This is happening to us as a punishment." And Reuben, he was the one who said only throw him in a pit because he was going to get Joseph out later and take him back to his dad. He says, "I told you shouldn't have done anything to him. Now we're paying for what we did for him." Joseph was listening and he heard them say that and talking about him. And he actually went out of the room and cried because he could hear that they were living with the guilt of what they had done to him. They couldn't forget it. Now what they had done was coming back to them again. And so Simeon, one of the brothers, stayed in prison and the other ones had to go back home again. And I forgot to say, when they first came to Joseph, because he was the governor of Egypt, they had all bowed down to him out of respect. Now remember Joseph's dreams back when he was like a teenager? He had dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars had bowed down to him, and the sheaves of grain had bowed down to him. So now, so many years later, his dream had come true, and he thought about that as he saw his brothers. His dream had come true too. It just took a long time, and a lot of hard things had happened before that came true. So anyway, his brothers, they're on their way back home, and they kind of don't feel very good. Simeon's in prison. They got to go home and tell Dad that, and they've got to tell him that next time Benjamin's got to go too. They know he won't be very happy. And then as they're traveling, one of them goes to get out some of the food. And he gets a shock because as he opens up the sack of food, he finds his money on top of the food. And he thinks, oh no. And then they open up the other bags, and all the bags have the money they'd paid right on the top. And they thought, oh no, now we're really going to be in trouble. Now that governor is going to think that we are thieves as well as spies. Now we'll really be in trouble. And how are we going to prove that we didn't steal the money? So they were very stressed. They went back home and they had to tell their dad all about it, about this governor in Egypt who thought that they were spies, and how he'd taken Simeon and put him in prison, and how next time they needed to take Benjamin. And he said, you are not taking Benjamin down there. Joseph is gone, and Benjamin was the second favorite child. He said, you are not taking him. So next week we will continue this story, what happens when they run out of food again. But I've got a song to sing because Joseph, he's had so many horrible, hard things happen to him. But he is able to see more of the purpose of it. So like his brothers had sold him to go to Egypt, and now he is saving everybody in Egypt and the people around through him understanding the dream and being able to store up the food. So he can see God's purpose and how God has worked all the hard things together for good. And that is a Bible promise that all things work together for good to them that love God. So I'm going to sing you a song called All Things Work Together for Our Good, and it is based on that promise in the Bible. All things work together for our good, even when it doesn't go the way we think it should. Forget his little children, the Father never could. All things work together for our good. He can move a mountain to his promise and always trust in him. All things work together for our good, even when it doesn't go the way we think it should. Forget his little children, the Father never could. All things work together for our good. He's my rock when stormy waters roll. I can trust him to be true, the keeper of my soul. Call on him and he will do great and mighty deeds. Before we even ask him, our Father knows our needs. All things work together for our good, even when it doesn't go the way we think it should. Forget his little children, the Father never could. All things work together for our good. So now I'll start with the short story first, which is a story of a Scottish doctor, William Mackay. So he told this story, which I'm going to read it to you in his own words. He says, "My dear mother had been a godly, pious woman, quite often telling me of the Saviour. And many times I'd been a witness to her wrestling in prayer for my soul's salvation. But nothing had made a deep impression on me. The older I grew, the more wicked I became. One day, a seriously injured labourer was brought into the hospital. The case was hopeless. He seemed to realise his condition, for he was fully conscious, and he asked me how long he would last. I gave him my opinion in as cautious a manner as I could. 'Have you any relatives whom we could notify?' I continued. The patient shook his head. His only wish was to see his landlady, because he owed her a small sum and also wished to bid her farewell. He also requested his landlady send him the book. I went to see him on my regular visits at least once a day. What struck me most was the quiet, almost happy expression constantly on his face. After the man died, some things about the deceased affairs were to be attended to in my presence. 'What shall we do with this?' asked the nurse, holding up a book in her hand. 'What kind of book is it?' I asked. 'The Bible of the poor man. As long as he was able to read it, he did so, and when he was unable to do so any more, he kept it under his bed cover.' I took the Bible, and could I trust my eyes? It was my own Bible, the Bible which my mother had given me when I left my parents' home, and which later, when short of money, I sold for a small amount. My name was still in it, written in my mother's hand. With a deep sense of shame, I looked upon the precious book. It had given comfort and refreshing to the unfortunate man in his last hours. It had been a guide to him into eternal life, so that he had been enabled to die in peace and happiness. And this book, the last gift of my mother, I had actually sold for a ridiculous price. Be it sufficient to say that the regained possession of my Bible was the cause of my conversion." So that is an amazing story of someone who got rid of their Bible and then it came back to them and they had a second chance to read it and to learn to know God. But now on to the longer story. So this story is called The Bible in the Wall. And it starts in 1815-6 in the country of Italy. So there was a bricklayer called Antonio, and he had to leave Italy to go look for some work. So he was only looking for work for, like a few months or so. So he hiked over the mountains to the beautiful country of Switzerland. But on his way along the trail, a kind lady gave him an Italian Bible, and she tried to explain to him how important it was, and she begged him to read it. Now, Antonio didn't know what to do because where he'd come from, he had been warned about the Bible. He had been warned that the Bible is a dangerous book and that you should only let people teach you about it. You shouldn't read it for yourself. And so he was like, do I actually want this book or not? But he did accept it, and he stuffed it in his bag, but he didn't have very good manners. He didn't even say thank you, and that was because he was a little bit scared of the book. So now he has it with him on his journey. What is he going to do with it? So he went to a town called Glarus, and he found some work, laying bricks. And while he was working hard, he was still thinking about that Bible and what he was going to do with it. And he had an idea. So as he was laying bricks, he saw a gap, and he thought, hey, the Bible might fit in that gap. I could get rid of it, and nobody will ever find it. And so there were other guys watching too, and he's like, hey, look what I'm going to do. And he stuffed that Bible into the gap, but it couldn't quite fit in there. And so he got his hammer and he banged it 2 or 3 times. So it had like some marks from his hammer. He covered it up with mortar. And later on, when his work was done, he went back to Italy again. The Bible was gone. He thought he'd gotten rid of it and nobody would ever see it again. But 5 years later, the town was now a town of 4,000 people. And in Switzerland, although it's so beautiful, there can be very bad storms and winds. And in the town of Glarus, there was what they called the wild south wind. So up to 10 to 12 times a year, they could have this terrible storm. And so whenever that storm came, or that wind, there would be very strict laws. So remember, this is before electricity, so there would have been a lot of candles and, fires and things like that. So whenever that wind would come, anybody who used any kind of fire would be forbidden to use it until the storm was over. So they couldn't have lights in the factories. Blacksmiths and locksmiths had to put out their fires. You weren't even allowed to bake bread. You weren't allowed to shoot with a gun. And there would be watchmen walking up and down the street to make sure that people would obey. Because if they didn't, there could be terrible fires. So wind would just blow flames around and could cause, a fire to spread really bad. And in 1299 and 1337 and 1477, there were very bad fires. But for the last 400 years, there had been no fires. So some of the people wondered, do we really need to be so strict? Are the rules still necessary? So on this one night, the town was holding a meeting to discuss different things from the town and to vote on different things. And so one of the questions that had come up was, do we need to keep all these strict rules? And they decided to keep them. Now, the very next day, Friday, May the 10th, the storm, the wild south wind, started up. And between 9 and 10 at night, there was a cry, fire, fire. Now, somehow the fire started in the stables. Now, that didn't make much sense because nobody even used fire in the stables, so they didn't know how it started. But it started somehow, and the wind just made it spread like crazy. So they have the horrible storm, and they have the scary fire spreading around the town. And now, because this was at night, other villagers could see the flames, but they didn't have enough, resources to help. And so the telegraph operator in Glarus He kept trying to get a message through to the bigger cities because they really needed the bigger cities to help them. But there was a problem. The telegraph operators didn't usually work at night. But he just tried anyway because he was desperate. And in one of the cities, in Rapperswil, the clerk had stayed late. And so to his surprise, he heard this message coming through saying, fire, fire, we need help, we need help. And so he was able to send a special train with firemen and fire engines. And then other ones came because he was able to get them from other cities as well. And so the fire engines came and they were able to save the factories. Now, the next morning, what a smoky mess. Half of the town was in ruins. 490 buildings were ruined. 300 homes were burned. Most of the public meeting places were gone. So this was very sad. But often when sad things happen, it can bring out the best in people. So many people came to help, gave whatever they could to help these poor people. And the people started making plans to rebuild the town. So a group of men got sent to rebuild Glarus. Now, one of these guys that came to help was called Mario, and he had a book in his pocket that he liked to read lots, and it was the Bible. And he would try to read it to others. Now, a lot of the other guys didn't really want to hear it, but there was one guy who was interested. There was Giovanni. Giovanni was a husband. So back home, he had a wife and children, and he'd had to leave them to go and work to earn money for them to get them through the winter. So he would much rather be at home with his family, but he has to work for them. So he's lonely, he's sad, he's homesick, and he's listening to Mario. Now, back at home, a lady had given him the Bible, but the religious leaders in his town had made him give it up. And so he'd just given it up because he didn't realize what a special book it was. So he's homesick and he's thinking about the Bible now. So he's working on rebuilding a house. And as they're working out what to do with these houses, maybe they're half burned down, they had to see how strong it was to see if they could kind of build the house up. And so Giovanni, he had a hammer and he smacked a wall and a book fell out. And he thought, what on earth? And so he picked it up and he had a look and it was a Bible. Now, remember, he was kind of wanting a Bible. He was interested in it. And now it just falls out of the wall as he's working on a house. How strange. But he says, oh, how happy I am. How I have longed for a Bible. I know I don't deserve this wonderful gift. Once before, a lady gave one to me, and our priest asked for it, and I foolishly gave it to him. This time, I'll die before I give the Bible up. And so he was so happy to have a Bible. And the other guys were like, how on earth did a Bible get in the middle of a house? So that was a bit of a mystery. But Giovanni was just happy to have it. And so he read it every day. And on Sundays, he would try to get his friends together and try to read it to them so they could hear it too. But he didn't really understand a whole lot of it yet. But some people didn't like him trying to share it and read it. Some of them even threatened him. But one day, a Swiss evangelist came and was talking to Giovanni. He helped him understand the Bible better, and he encouraged him, and he gave him some very good advice. He said, you should set up a free school and teach guys how to read and write and to count, because their guys didn't really know a whole lot of that. And he could use the Bible to teach them how to read, and maybe he could make them interested that way, the ones who were against him. So he did that, and when the students would finish their lessons, they would get an Italian New Testament, so they'd get their own one. Now, as they learned how to count, they realized that builders would cheat them sometimes. So now they could make sure they wouldn't get cheated. Now they could read letters from their family and they could write them. Then it was time for Giovanni to go home. When he got home, his wife had had a bad fall and she'd broken her arm. And because they had no doctors in the town, she couldn't get it fixed. So now she just had a useless arm. But Giovanni told her lots of stories, and his children as well, and he especially liked to tell them about the book that he'd found. And, he wanted everybody around heard this story about this book that just fell out of the wall. But he got into trouble before long. He had a priest at his door, and the priest wanted to take his Bible, and Giovanni said, "No, I'm not letting you take it." The priest got angry and threatened him. But in their country, they had religious freedom, so the priest couldn't make him give it up. Now, a salesman who sold Bibles asked Giovanni to join him for a few weeks to go and sell Bibles with him. So he went. He went from town to town, and then he went to Switzerland. Now, this was a bit scary because they didn't have the religious freedom like in his country. But he went, and he arrived on a yearly market day. Now, a lot of the people didn't like it that he was trying to sell Bibles. And one young guy came up and he said, I could get a Bible for free if I wanted to. I plastered one in a wall in Glarus 5 to 6 years ago. Surely in spite of the fire, it would not be out again. Giovanni was astonished. And he said, yes, that is true. In spite of the fire, that Bible received great care. It was saved almost by a miracle. And so he told the guy about how he had found this Bible. Now, this was the same guy, Antonio, who had put the Bible in the wall. And he was shocked. He's like, it can't be the same Bible. And so Giovanni pulled it out, and Antonio saw the hammer marks on the Bible, and he was shocked. He thought nobody would ever get that Bible out. Now he's been faced with it again. And Giovanni said, buy a Bible. You can read it. And Antonio just got angry. He said, go away with your Bibles. And then he stirred up so much trouble that Giovanni had to leave. So in the spring, Giovanni had to travel for his work again. So he went back into Switzerland. And guess who was working on the same building as him? It was Antonio. So Antonio was not very happy to see Giovanni again because he was reminded of the Bible. But all the other men treated Giovanni with lots of respect. And so over time, Antonio began to treat him with respect too. And Giovanni was kind to him. Now one day, Antonio's life changed. He was carrying a heavy piece of stone up a ladder, and he lost his balance, and he fell backwards from a height of about 50 feet. So he was taken to hospital, and he was in hospital for months. So Giovanni would come to visit him and talk to him, but he really didn't have much time to visit him, so he left him his Bible. But Antonio was not interested. But he's lying in hospital. He's bored, so one day he just started paging through it. And some ladies saw him, and they had tried to talk to him about the Bible before. And so they started explaining some of the verses and telling him how much God loved him. And so that interested him to know that God really cared about him in spite of all he's done, in spite of him trying to get rid of the book 2 times. So he kept on reading the Bible, and slowly he began to understand, and he began to love and know God. So he was in hospital for 6 months, but his hip was broken, and now he was crippled for life. So somebody suggested he should study to be a teacher. So he did, and he became a teacher in Italy in a Christian school, because in Switzerland they didn't have the religious freedom, so he went to Italy. And he wanted to share the message of the Bible with everyone. And he ended up marrying Giovanni's oldest daughter. So that is a really incredible story. And I hope these stories help you to think about God's special promise that all things work together to those who love him. And also I hope these stories help you see how important and how special the Bible is.